For the Planning Commission for April 4th to order at 6:01. Shall we pledge to the flag?
Roll call?
Oh, roll call? Roll call first?
Are we gonna do roll call? Yeah, we can't do that. Okay, roll call, please.
Chair Williams,
Here.
Commissioner Gold,
Here.
Commissioner Jameson,
Here.
Commissioner Peterson,
Here.
Commissioner Rodriguez, absent.
Okay, now the pledge.
Got it. Place your hand over your heart and repeat with me. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
It's actually one nation under God. There's no comma.
Oh my God. Thank you, Commissioner James.
I have not said that all year long.
You said it on the high school school board
I
for many,
sure
many
did.
years.
I sure did.
Okay, do we have any public comments for items that are not on the agenda? I don't have any here. Is there anybody online that would like to speak? Apparently not, so we'll move on. Hey, Justin. Any requests for continuance, withdrawals, or addition of agenda items? Seeing none, moving on. Conflicts or ex parte communications? Anybody?
So I have a conflict with discussion item B, which is the Mission Drive Hotel Apartments, is because of where I live in my house. I'm right at 502 feet to the development, and I'm within 500 feet of the intersection of Pine, Old Mill, and 246. I feel that I need to not push the envelope on that one, since there will be new access now off of Pine Street that's proposed that directly affects me. Prior it did not, but that seems like it. If there's a different ruling at some point or decision, I suppose that I could change that. But at this point, I don't feel comfortable doing it. And then I had a question, if I could, for the city attorney, that I own restaurants in town. Is it permissible, in your opinion, I know this isn't gospel, but permissible for myself to participate in restaurant windows, retail trucks, food trucks, whatever we are calling them, because I do have numerous food operations in town?
Thank you for bringing this up, Commissioner. As far as, I'll give my disclaimer at the beginning that I don't make final determinations on any conflicts for members of the commission. Certainly your analysis of being, within 500 feet of the item 3B seems reasonable, and I appreciate you for bringing that up. As far as the item 3A, I think the decision point for you is whether you feel that this is a generally applicable law that's going to be, or discussion I should say. At this point it's just a discussion, so there's no decision to be made such that you're similarly situated to the rest of the public. And whether it will have a financial impact on your businesses, that's also something to consider. So those are kind of the factors I would say, but I won't make the decision for you.
I know, yeah, and I appreciate that. I know we can't get a full answer. Maybe I shouldn't speak on that issue also. I'm not 100% sure. I just don't want someone ever thinking, I have 3 food operations and control 3 other food operations that are either tenants or I'm partners in, that all have potential to have retail windows and/or food trucks with a commercial kitchen, I would hate for somebody in the public to believe that I was doing something for or against. I'm absolutely torn. I don't know. The one is clear. This one I'm a little more gray. I just don't know what to do. And when in doubt, you just err on the side of and say, I'm out.
That's certainly a reasonable approach. Caution is always appreciated in conflicts of interest questions.
Well, since there's 4 of us here, it doesn't really matter, right? Because you can recuse yourself and there's still a decision can be made.
And so we do have a quorum, so we're okay.
Correct.
But we're not making a
We have a
decision
quorum,
today.
and we're also not taking a vote on the matter today. It's just for direction to staff. So 4 of you can certainly proceed and keep the discussion moving and the item moving forward. And then perhaps you and I can talk in between when this item comes back around for actual planning commission review and recommendation to city council for potential code amendments. We can discuss them in interim.
That would make me feel better. Yes. Okay. Thank you. So I have a conflict with both A and B. So I'll be leaving y'all tonight. Going home and watching the game.
Okay, anybody else have any conflicts? Moving on to 1D, approval of minutes for the special joint city council and planning commission and the regular planning commission meetings on March 7th. This is a big night. Anybody have comments, questions?
I move the adoption.
I have one thing on page 7. We're talking about discussion items for the lumberyard. Says the item was continued to a future city council meeting. That should be a planning commission meeting.
With that correction, I'll move approval.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Passes 5-0. Public hearings, none. Discussion items. Have a good evening.
See y'all. That mean I get my money or no? Wasn't here long enough, was I?
So we'll start with item 3A. Staff want to fill us in on what's happening here?
This will be presented by Chelsea. She did most of the work on this. We're bringing it forward to you because of the way the ordinance is written and clarify how service windows are permitted in the city. So I'll turn it over to Chelsea.
Thank you, and thank you, Commission. So this item actually went to City Council first, and the issue is that the planning staff has received several inquiries recently about, and applications actually, to add walk-up food service window elements facing outdoor patios, but facing private property. So not a service window facing a street, which there are some of those grandfathered in the city, but these would be facing private property. And under the current code, as it explains in the staff report, such walk-up windows are prohibited in the TRC. The City Council recently took a look at this at staff's request and recommended that staff come up with or develop some amendments to Title 11 to allow for walk-up windows facing private patios, but otherwise continue to prohibit these walk-up windows in the TRC. And some history background for you. This is in the staff report, but this prohibition on walk-up food service windows in the TRC was initially adopted in 1994. At that time, the Planning Commission recommended to City Council to allow walk-up windows facing private patios, but to prohibit other types of walk-up windows, so those facing the street. But the City Council decided on a blanket prohibition. It's a little unclear in the legislative history why the Planning Commission's recommendation wasn't taken, but at the same time, the City Council was considering, there's the McDonald's was trying to come into town, and so there was some opposition to that type of drive-through, which is different, but still a food service window. So I think maybe there was some cross-pollination of feelings going on with the drive-throughs versus the walk-up food service window. But at that time, the Planning Commission had recommended to allow those facing the private courtyard, and the current City Council has directed staff to develop some amendments to allow that, those windows facing the courtyard. So at this time, staff is just looking for your general direction. We've provided some preliminary code modifications in attachment A to your staff report that would make simple adjustments to the definition of the walk-up windows and the language prohibiting them in the TRC to allow these windows if they're facing a private patio or seating area, and to clearly distinguish that a walk-up food service window is not the same as a food truck or a sidewalk vending operation, such as a push cart or some other operation where you might vend food from and people walk up to, but this is something that's in a building. And so to clarify that definition. And then in addition, in working on this walk-up food service window issue at the direction of council, staff became aware that under the current code, the food trucks I'm using food trucks kind of as the term here, but basically it's a motorized conveyance that has a window where you get service and food out of. We commonly call them food trucks, that, when those are on public property, such as the street or, public parking lot or the sidewalk, whatever, that those are handled under Title IV, Chapter 4 of the Subbang Municipal Code. But when food trucks are on private property, they're not currently or directly addressed in the code. And so we're also asking for some guidance for how food trucks might potentially be addressed in the code, since they kind of provide a similar experience to a walk-up service window in a building in some ways, and so we see these issues being related, and certainly Planning Commission is getting inquiries now since City Council has discussed the walk-up food service window issue about food trucks as well. So we would like to get your guidance on that. We don't have any offered preliminary code language for you to review, but just want to have a general discussion on that front. Some things to consider are that food trucks are regulated under state law, so all the health and food safety standards, we're going to be preempted from regulating that because that's already in the health and safety code. Similarly, if food trucks on public streets are regulated under the California Vehicle Code, Section 22455. So the city's a little constrained on how it can regulate food trucks on the streets and public, the city streets and things like that. But when it's on private property, the city's traditional zoning rules and powers apply. So we have a little more flexibility to regulate them when they're being operated out of private property. And we provided some examples of areas where other jurisdictions have regulated food trucks in the staff report. And so offer that for your consideration and discussion, and look forward to hearing your thoughts on how we might or might not want to address food trucks in addition to your thoughts on the walk-up window language. Thank you.
Thank you, Chelsea. Any questions?
I do. I have a couple questions actually, Chelsea. The first question is, when we're talking about food windows, you had said that the city council wants us to discuss any restrictions that we think that we feel are appropriate. Does that mean that the walk-up windows is actually happening, and now we're just working on restrictions? Or are we talking about the overall program that we could potentially not have them?
Okay, so two things. For the walk-up food service window in a building, we're asking for your preliminary comments on the language that was drafted. City Council has directed staff to come up with an amendment to allow walk-up food service windows in facing private patios and seating areas.
Okay, so they will be allowed, now we're just working on the restrictions.
Well, I mean, you, as the planning commission, will have a chance, since it's Title 11, it's the change to a zoning code. So you have the opportunity to provide recommendation to city council. That will be at the next hearing at a formally public, a public hearing that's properly noticed and everything. This is just a preliminary discussion because staff wanted to make sure that we had your insight as we were developing the language. So I would say that has been the direction of city council, that city council takes your recommendation into account when they consider code amendments to Title 11, and you still have your full discretion as planning commission to provide recommendations to the city council. But understanding that in this context, the city council has provided that direction to staff. But certainly, yes, you can recommend, whatever the majority of the commission wishes to recommend is within your power.
Thank you.
If I may, I think the question you were asking is what's happening today out there for different requests for windows?
Well, that would be question 1C. But question 1A was you had said that city council was looking for our go ahead.
No, our input.
Our input. It sounded like this was already approved. This is already happening. Now we were looking for input and some restrictions. That's what my question was. My second question is: are we only talking about food windows, or are we talking about other retail windows? So if we had a business that was selling clothes or home goods or shoes or whatever that looked like, are we talking about that as well, or are we strictly talking about food? And if we do approve food windows, can other retail businesses have windows as well for service and sales?
So this discussion, I'll walk backwards through your questions. This discussion is only about food service windows. And so we're not changing the scope of what a food service window is in the suggested language, which as defined as an opening in an exterior wall of a building through which food, beverage, or other consumable items are provided or served. So this would not address windows through which retail, other types of retail would happen. And that would be outside the scope of this. And then as far as your initial question, so the code has not been amended yet. And right now we're having preliminary discussion. What happens next is that we'll notice a public hearing, and at the next planning commission hearing in May, this item will be before you again for a public hearing, and you'll have a vote on a recommendation to city council on whether or how to address walk-up food service windows facing private patios. So at this point, staff would like your general input on the edits that we've proposed in attachment A of your staff report to this item. That's for the walk-up food service windows. And then the food trucks is a much more broad discussion because city council has not given direction on that point. We just realized it was kind of a related issue as we were developing the walk-up window issue. And noticed that the code doesn't directly address food trucks on private property. So that we just want your general comment on. If you think it's warranted that we should be addressing it directly in the code, and if so, how would you propose that should be addressed? So two different layers there. I hope that helped clarify things.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
But my only question is the two that exist now, they will be grandfathered in.
They already are.
Okay. So they're not,
Which are those two?
they aren't in jeopardy.
Subbang Restaurant, I'm assuming is one of them, right?
Right, and then the hamburger place.
Big Bopper,
Yeah.
and the Sausage Garden is grandfathered in or is not?
Yes, we've, those are the ones that we have identified that are still operational. Yes.
Is it the Sausage Garden? They actually have, you go in and you order and you sit down.
Through a window, but it's kind of a window.
You don't order through a window.
Sorry? They have a kiosk.
They have
Yeah.
a
Walk
kiosk set up out front, and you order there, and they put the order in through a window, and it comes back out through the window, but you're not,
But you order from the table, which makes the difference.
Okay, then what about the new Abelskiver place then?
The Averskiva place is probably the example of why the city council did not want to have service windows right on the street because they were blocking traffic. And so this was the reason that they stopped issuing permits for the service windows right along the sidewalk, and we haven't issued any since.
When you say since the one near Copenhagen House?
Since the Subbang Restaurant one you're talking about?
The Subbang Restaurant's been there
for a long
100
time.
years.
Yeah.
So the current ones that are there and grandfathered would have been before 1994 when the prohibition went into place.
So, oh, go ahead.
So what do we do about the one Abelskiver one that's down by Copenhagen House?
You're talking about the small building that's in front of the Copenhagen House?
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe there is a, so we have, I don't believe there is a walk-up window on that one, but what we're talking about right now is windows that open into a private courtyard, so
Into the
if
patio.
it,
So you have to
right.
go into the patio in order to get the Abelskivers, you can't get them on the street. Okay, that's
And that's the same with the,
good clarification, thank you.
Why is that a restriction, why was there a restriction for a private patio? I could understand if it was a nuisance up against someone's actual residential private, if there's some TRC adjacent to a residential unit, you don't want noise and smell and stuff bothering a resident, but as far as like the Copenhagen Sausage Garden, that opens up, that why can't people just go up and, it's a beer garden, so why is there a restriction onto a private patio?
this is the dilemma that we had, is that the ordinance, as it's written right now, is pretty restrictive. It says no food service windows. And so as we started seeing through COVID and through the newer projects that we're getting, they want service windows. And so we realized that we'll probably need to clarify the record in the ordinance to allow for food service windows in private courtyard areas. Once they leave the public right-of-way and they're in a enclosed area or in a courtyard, then service windows are for the convenience of those that are in that courtyard.
Right.
And so that's why we're coming forward to you to make this recommendation to the city council. And we'll be bringing this ordinance back to you at your next meeting, fully noticed, and be able to adopt it at that time. While this was going on, the question about food trucks came up because, again, that's a service window. And so we currently are not allowing food trucks in Subbang, again, competing with the existing restaurants and, it's a service window. So we think that we probably will need to come back after we get through this first round and address food trucks, because that is something that people are interested in, and how that can be a benefit to the city.
But at the
It's
same
a-
time, I was just, go ahead.
It's a service window, but it's two totally different things.
Mhm.
Exactly,
Yeah,
and
two
that's why
totally
we
different
didn't want to
topics.
mix the two tonight,
Okay.
but we wanted to let you know that this is something that we're,
And I was gonna say that too, like, I'm all about more options for business owners and, letting people decide what's best for their business, as long as it's, it's not a nuisance or, what makes it best for the whole city. But as far as like, food trucks too, some of the local restaurants we have food trucks, like I know one of the taco places has a mobile food truck, and so, I'm not opposed to food trucks, because a lot of them are our local business. I know the pizza
trucks on those old, on the old converted trucks. They go around here in the valley. So I'm not opposed to, would anyone be opposed to it?
But again, I think
Not
there's
opposed to it.
two totally different subjects.
Yeah,
Yeah, but when it comes to food trucks, I think the question is whether or not, and which is not addressed in the code, but the questions that are coming forward to us from businesses who have a valid question. Well, can I take my food truck, park it on my private property that's in the TRC, whether it be a business property or just a private property in the TRC, and sell food?
right.
And it's not expressly addressed in the code.
And what are the projects that you were mentioning that are coming up that are bringing this to our attention? I mean, like I always thought it'd be kind of cool to have a hot dog cart like on your, if you rented a place and made it like a DG thing and made Danish hot dogs or something, that'd be kind of cool. Like if someone out there listening decided up and that'd be cool. But why is that? I mean, I don't see that being a problem. Why
So
would it be
the
an issue?
food cart would be probably considered to be a peddler, and we do have a peddler ordinance now that's in place.
But if it's stationary on, like always stayed there and.
It would still be a peddler. So if the ordinance allows for the city to permit up to 4 peddlers in any given year, they have to come in, fill out an application. There's a process, pay a fee, and then they would need to let us know. We would know who they are, we would know exactly where they're selling. If it's in the TRC, that's regulated, and up to 4 of them could be permitted. So if you had something like a hot dog cart, that would be a peddler cart that we would permit under that guideline. When we are talking about the walk-up windows that are within private property, where we were seeking a clarification as to what the city council's real vision would be of how to apply this ordinance, those would be like the project, for example, with the bocce court in the Otterdag Square. It's basically, a service window that's facing out, serving wine and whatnot. So that's where the question came in. That's when we went to the city council and they clarified that they would like to allow that kind of use. And so we are here today on that one to just get more clarification and advice and from you to the city council in developing the actual language of the ordinance.
I agree with the city council. I think it should be okay.
Before we move on, let's take this to public comment and then bring it back for further discussion. Do we have anybody here that would like to speak on this? Anybody online or phone? Seeing none, we'll bring it back and continue our discussion. So maybe we can just break this into 2 parts. Let's talk about the wording on the food service windows in buildings, which is the primary thing that the city council asked us to discuss.
Jack, I'm sorry, could I say one thing?
Sure, public comment, yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't even know this was happening. Hi, I'm Ed St. George, and I'm not here, I'm here for my hotel, but the food truck is a little bit of a concern of mine. I understand what Justin's saying, I just saw the pizza truck out at the high school event the other day, and I thought it was great having that there, and, we've had, the barbecues, but one of my concerns would be having food trucks, at least in the downtown area, and I would be opposed to that, although I could make some pretty good money on that with some of the real estate that I've obtained already, just renting them out to food trucks. But I don't think that would be beneficial to a lot of the restaurants here in town. For example, the corner lot that we have currently where we're proposing the little 9-unit hotel, if somebody else were to have that, they could put a food truck right there, and that would be the entrance to Subbang, a food truck. And here's one of the things about food trucks that I noticed in Santa Barbara. The sign ordinances don't apply to food trucks, and they can have these flashing neon signs going all the time, and they're quite irritating. I mean, I like the idea for small businesses coming to Subbang, personally, but I would suggest maybe just in certain districts or a certain type of events. That would be my suggestion. I'm the new guy in town, but I'm just saying, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? So what we're asked to discuss tonight is this add-on that says walk-up food service windows do not include windows in motor vehicles as defined in the California Vehicle Code, through which food, beverage, and other consumable items are provided or served to the general public, commonly called food trucks, or windows in a conveyance engaged in a sidewalk vending activity as defined in Title 4, Chapter 4. So
And then
really, that's not changing anything. It's just redefine or defining food trucks as not having walk-up windows in a building. I mean, it says that in the part before that. So.
Yes, there's also one other provision, if I may. If you scroll down into Title 11-12-7C, we're adding another sentence there, which is probably the meat of what City Council was requesting that you would analyze. You're right, the definitional edit is merely for clarification. It doesn't change the scope of the definition as proposed.
So if you have any comments for the direction that we're going, we can address those before we bring this item back into the May meeting for formal adoption. Or if you have any other suggestions, would be greatly appreciated. And then we will be taking, once you take action, it will be going to City Council for final adoption.
Okay, so really the two things here are, as Chelsea pointed out, reiterating that food truck is not in a building. And that's basically what it's saying. And also in what is it, item C, is extending the current prohibition to provide an exception for windows opening onto private areas. In other words, not directly onto the street or any city-owned land. Is that basically what it's doing?
Correct, that's what staff's proposing as a means to allow for this added option that we're seeing requests for.
It looks short and sweet, but is it gonna be, when a project like this comes up for review, are they gonna take into consideration the amount of space, because what if they do have a private patio, but it's only 10 feet by 10 feet or something, and then people line up and they start spilling out into on the public sidewalk? Is that taken into consideration? Do you do that here, or is that project per project basis?
That's a good comment. I think we'll look at that again to see how the staging of a window would affect the public right of way.
Well, we see that already with certain restaurants popular restaurants that have long waits. People are already queuing up on the public sidewalks. So it would be interesting to hear.
And that-
Almost all of them.
Sure,
Yeah,
right.
and that happens definitely with the one that's been grandfathered in, the Subbang restaurant with the Able Schemers.
So I think Justin brings up a good point. I think that's something that we should look at in defining some minimum area.
Yep.
And just because you have 10 foot between buildings and you own half of that, can you put in a window with a 5 foot walk up? I'm not sure we want to do that.
Great suggestion. Thank you.
It'll be interesting to see what we come up with, because again, even there are some drive-throughs, obviously not here, that are so popular that take up blocks and blocks of city streets.
Chick-fil-A in Santa Barbara is having that
And
issue.
that's the same thing, right? So it'll be interesting to see what you have to say.
But these aren't drive up, these are walk ups.
Understood.
I just, hopefully it didn't open up Pandora's box and we went into the sheds again. It's gonna go on for 17 meetings.
So is there any further discussion on that?
Not today,
Any other provisions that we might ask to be looked at? For example, would the fire department have any issues, or the police department?
In most cases, these projects are coming through to you as part of a development plan or change of use or the DRC. So it gives us an opportunity to review them at several different levels. But we do run them by the health department as well as fire department whenever there's a change like this, so that we make sure we're not usurping someone else's requirements.
And I know that you would, but please make sure that we address the ADA requirements as well.
Correct.
So if this goes forward and somebody wants to put in a walk-up window, that proposal would come back to the planning commission before it would be just an over-the-counter.
It depends on where it is with the building. Right now, it's not required to be a conditional use permit or a development plan. What we'd be looking at is probably taking it to the DRC, because it's somewhat like you're changing the building similar to a sign or colors or whatever. If there's an issue beyond that, we can bring it to the planning commission. But right now, the way this ordinance is written, we're not suggesting that every walk-up window being proposed in the future would come to the DRC.
Because then it would be an over-the-counter item.
Correct.
After approved.
Yes. So we have I'll use an example. We have one building which really kind of between the bocce ball courts, which you saw that one, and that started raising the issue of what is a walk-up window. But we also have another project that has gone through the DRC. It's the building, what I call it the yellow house next to the Park Place building, between Park Place and the Coast Range. And they have, they're proposing a nice patio area. One of the windows is actually a service window. Well, technically, it doesn't meet the ordinance, but it is in a private area, fully contained, it has ADA access, it meets all the other requirements, but it wasn't specific to the ordinance. So we thought that was a really good example for a project that is going through a renovation and allowing a service window in their patio area.
Okay. Shall we move to part two on?
So just a follow-up, we'll work with Chelsea on the ideas of standards for queuing, service spacing, and also making sure that we address ADA access, and then come back to you with some changes.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Now, food trucks. So right now, as I understand, food trucks are not allowed in the TRC. They're allowed outside the TRC. Is that correct?
Correct. When people do come to
Not
us.
normally. Oh, Lori, if I could jump in a little bit. I think historically we have not, but under, just last year, we had to update our street vending ordinance because state law was amended to prohibit cities from totally prohibiting street vendors, and food trucks fell under that. And so currently the ordinance on public properties, with Title 4, Chapter 4, does regulate and allow for food trucks, but they have to get a permit, they have to meet a whole bunch of requirements. And I don't think we've seen any of those come in yet, but historically we have not allowed them. But that ordinance, the sidewalk vending ordinance, only applies on public property. So the code is still silent on food trucks on private property.
So I'm gonna ask this question again, and it was about business windows. Now I'm gonna ask it about trucks. Are we specifically talking about food service, or are we talking about any kind of retail sales? Can a truck that sells books or jewelry or clothes or whatever it is, pick your poison, can they, sell their retail on private property?
Currently, the code does not discuss any type of, service from a conveyance, whether it be motorized or not, on private property. On public property, that's addressed in Title 4, Chapter 4 for the street vending ordinance, and it's not specific to food. If you're selling food, there's additional requirements, like you have to meet state health and safety standards and things like that. In our staff report, we were certainly thinking more about food trucks and that type of service because this was coming up in the context of the food service window, which is limited to food and beverage. However, you're right that sometimes mobile sale units sell other things besides food. So yes, we could be discussing that other types of retail as well for this one.
In our
Because again, it's
location,
not addressed in the code at all.
in our location, we should discuss it, because this is a very retail-heavy area, and certainly one that would be, one of concern that we should address and identify what we want to do with it.
Yeah, because you do see other things being sold, like orange stands or strawberries, and then there's a person that sells bonsai trees every once in a while off of, as you're leaving town, on the side of there's like a dirt patch. So, is that a permitted person? Do they come and get a permit, or they just set up shop on it?
So the regulation for the peddler applies really to the TRC area, which is where we can regulate and issue the permits. In the greater area, and Chelsea can comment more, there's limited, we have limited ability to have any regulations, so the state law currently allows for peddlers.
And you said there's only 4 permits allowed per year?
There, at any point, yes, our ordinance allows the city to issue 4 peddler licenses per year to operate within the TRC area.
Okay. So up to 4 businesses can do it if they want to.
Correct.
I hardly ever, or do they get utilized sometimes, or, because I don't remember off the top of my head seeing.
We have not had any applications go through so far, so we still have the 4 outstanding available for anybody to apply.
But they have to be associated with an existing business. Is that
No,
correct?
no, not at all.
No.
Anybody can come in and put in for their application. We would ask them for their identification, so that we know who they are. We can ask them where exactly they would operate during what hours as part of the permit. But given the state laws and under our ordinance, you can only regulate it to a certain extent.
I would be a terrible poker player.
Pardon me?
I would be a terrible poker player. I'm shocked. Sorry, I'm surprised.
I'm surprised no one's applied for it. It's surprising. Because there are a lot of those kinds of businesses out there.
Okay, but I feel like my question's not being answered. Maybe it's not, I'm not turning it into a question, I'm just making it into a comment. We should address if we're gonna talk about food trucks, we should talk about the retail trucks too. Because in other cities, they're a big deal, and with our retail-heavy city, it would be something to discuss.
I agree with that comment. That's smart.
Okay, great.
So what suggestions would you have on, I'm not familiar with the state law, which.
So the
everything else in
state law
says
doesn't
we can't
impact-
do anything.
The state law doesn't impact private property. That's only on public property, and that's already addressed under Title 4, Section 4. So this is, you don't have to worry about the restrictions imposed by state laws. We're talking about private property where the city's regular powers apply.
Regardless of whether it's, they're selling clothes or shoes or watches, or is it just food that we don't have to worry about?
Regardless of the items offered for sale.
Okay. So on private property, that could be a person with a home in the TRC that could set up
A peddler's permit, right?
yeah, something out of the back of a truck or a van or What about, like private parties? You know, somebody has a birthday party and wants to bring in a food truck, would that be allowed?
So currently, there are not, we don't address that. So one thing to consider is maybe there's a special events type permit that we would want to, that could be something to consider. As far as operating out of a residential house, like if the person who owns the house wants to operate a business from that home, even if they're gonna do it out of a vehicle parked in their driveway, I think that would start to cross over into home occupation permits, which is something that's addressed. I haven't looked at that cross-section, and we can certainly dive deeper into that to see how the home occupation permit might overlap if the business is being run on a residential property from the person who owns the residence, but out of a vehicle on that property. That's a little nuanced. But I think in the TRC predominantly we were thinking, a private parking lot or something that's zoned commercial. So it's otherwise appropriate to have business going on there, but this is, a truck or a vehicle sitting in a parking space. So you're bringing up great points. We can certainly consider, a TRC. There are some residences, so we should consider that. And then as far as events, I think that is another nuance. Special events permits might be something versus someone who wants to have a truck, for example, in a public parking lot, like, Tuesday through Thursday every week as a standing business that's ongoing. So those are different situations, and we're interested in your recommendations on all of it.
Another example that comes to mind is Music in the Park. On occasion, we've had vendors that are down on the park property, but down by the gazebo selling hot dogs or hamburgers or pizza and what have you. Is that something that is, we've done it in the past, so I'm assuming that it's currently allowed under our existing regulations.
Is that with the special events permit?
Yes, we
That's what I was about to
permit
ask.
those through special events permits.
Yeah, because there's special events, where does this overlap, and then do they use the language from special events for this? And then I did have a question to use, if someone does get a peddler permit, because I would assume this is gonna overlap with the window vehicle or food truck, where would they operate? Do they just park on the side of the street in a legal parking stall and sell there, or where does the peddler's permit allow a person to operate within the TRC or the city limits?
Chelsea, is there any specific language? I think the general, by memory, there's some prohibitions on, blocking public right of way and all that kind of standard stuff.
Yeah, they have to explain, like, the city has to understand where they're gonna be operating in their application. And, if it's a push cart or something, it might be on a public walkway in a park. If it's more of a vehicle, it might be parked in a parking space on public property or, adjacent to the street. But they're not gonna, there would be restrictions in the permit that would prohibit it from, like, blocking driveways or otherwise obstructing traffic or parking in some unsafe manner. So yeah, that where they're located is gonna be, there's restrictions in the code, but then the permit will define where they can actually operate for those on public property.
Yeah, I know it's kind of getting into the weeds, but I feel like there's an overlap there.
So basically, we're looking at, should we extend what is currently in place for public property, should we extend that to private property as well?
That is one way to look at it. I think the city, so you could do it that way. You could just say, let's expand the sidewalk vending ordinance and have it apply to public and private property. One thing to consider with that is the city has more discretion to regulate these types of businesses and uses on private property than they do on public property. So if there is a desire to be more restrictive, then you would want to have a separate ordinance or section addressing private property use for this type of, for trucks or, peddling services, because the city could be more restrictive since the state law isn't dictating the scope of the city's discretion on private property. But if the planning commission thinks that it's appropriate to have that be consistent and that the standards in place on the public property are appropriate for private property, that is certainly one way to address this.
Tough one.
So this issue's been introduced to you. We will be bringing back just the window issue at the next meeting.
In buildings.
In buildings, yes. And if you have any more ideas or thoughts, we could have that discussion or, agendize this for more discussion at the next meeting. Just so we can take your ideas to the city council, both for the ordinance and for food trucks and two different actions.
But my personal feeling is we shouldn't allow it on private property. But if for some reason there was good reason to do that, I think it should be well regulated. In other words, hours, number of days that you can do it. In other words, you can't just pull a food truck or something up onto your private patio and start a new business.
Yeah, the only exception I can think of is if it's like a church or something, they wanna do an event, but then that falls into an event thing, so
Right.
I think this.
For events,
Yeah.
I don't have a problem,
Yeah.
but my concern, I have no idea where this might happen. Where somebody say, okay, I can have a food truck, I'm gonna put it here next to my catering business, and it's gonna be open 24/7, and I don't think that should be allowed.
Yeah, we had an example of someone requesting for a opening of a business to have food trucks. And we said, well, that's a special event. You're adding more traffic to your opening, and
Right.
you're blocking traffic, and we need to look at all of this, but it's just a one-off request for
Right.
your opening. That
That's a lot
falls
different
into a special event. So that's how we've been interpreting the ordinance for the last couple of years.
Right. And I think the reason we are here with you today discussing this in concept, at least getting your initial thoughts, is just because of all of these changes in state law that don't necessarily deal with private property. They're just raising questions in minds of businesses because all of these additional sales are being, allowed in town, including, micro kitchens now in the Santa Barbara County. So it's a trend, so we are here to discuss it, and if your commentary is not to allow them, we're really looking at the use of for retail or for permanent sales of food or whatever on private property. So if your comment is not to allow for that, we could come back with recommendations on how to draft that language.
That's what I would like to do.
And if other commissioners have any
Well, and
comments.
the county has rules and regs for kitchen use in a home and how many visitors, purchasers they can have come. So can't we kind of investigate that and try to incorporate that into what might be going on our private property?
Yeah, and it would be different than obviously a food truck, the kitchen that's
Right.
cooking.
Right.
So we're looking for your initial, do you want to allow any of it or do you want to just outlaw it? Obviously, we are subject to whatever the county allows, we can't restrict that, but we can restrict what the city can restrict.
So I know what everybody else thinks, I don't think we should allow it. But we're not voting or anything
No, we're
here, it's
just
just
taking
discussion
direction.
tonight.
Any additional thoughts from commissioners?
Okay, let's move
Okay.
on to item 3B.
Thank you very much for that discussion. Okay, The item before you is a discussion item, presentation on the Mission Drive Hotel and Apartments, proposed by Ed St. George in the old Subbang lumberyard. You've seen this project several times in different configurations. What's being brought before you tonight is a request to put the hotel in the front area of Mission Drive for 79 units, and then have micro units in the back along Maple Drive. One of the things that is important to note here is that no access would be taken off of Mission, that the access would be taken off of Maple, and Mr. St. George has purchased one of the properties along Pine Street, and that will serve as an access, taking traffic off of Mission before it comes into the site. The project has, currently is zoned DR20 and is considered obviously part of our housing inventory. And so the concern was in looking at the hotel and housing on this site is how do we allow the hotel on a DR20 site? So the proposal by the applicant is to come back to the city with a rezone to TRC, which the primary use would be the hotel, the spa, the entertainment, the restaurant, and the secondary use would be the residential. And we would still have our inventory of residential units, but it would be a secondary use to the primary use, which would be the hotel. This is one way for the city to maintain the inventory that's being proposed on that site, which is 44 units, and still meet the requirements for the housing element. This project is a substantial size. It is proposing underground parking for the parking that's required, both for the residential and the hotel and the related uses. They are also going to have one unit or one building that will be higher than the regulations. It'll be a 4-story building. The rest of the units or the buildings are going to be meeting the code, which is 35-foot high. And then there's architectural features that could go up to 50. So we have one interior building that's going to be higher than that because it will be 4-story. The other proposal that was brought forward is to look at an agreement with the city for using some of the parking over at the Vets Hall for overflow parking or valet parking, depending on some of the events that they may hold at the hotel. So that's one of the considerations to look at as we move this project through the process. So today we're here to listen to the applicant, listen to your comments, and based on that, the applicant will decide how to move forward with both the city and the permit application itself. So feel free to ask any questions or answer anything that you have.
And
If I could just jump in there too, just to be clear, they haven't submitted an application yet, so this is just a preliminary review. And the discussion, is for the general concept of the project, and until an application is submitted, at that time there'll be more project-specific review, and the commission should keep an open mind until we see the actual application. But tonight we're discussing, the general concept of the project to give the applicant some guidance for when they actually submit their application.
Yeah, thank you, Chelsea, for that, and just for everybody's knowledge as well. This is why we're here at the Planning Commission today, because we have the initial direction from the City Council to continue to work on a project that's a hotel project with the applicant. But we're still kind of going through this preliminary review. We don't have an actual application yet, so this has not been to DRC, for example, for the design review either. We don't have any of those comments. Once we have an actual project, it will go through all of that appropriate process. And the applicant has a presentation here that they can present.
Okay. Ed, you want to make your presentation now?
Can we do it together? Is that okay?
Yeah.
It's a little unusual.
I have a clicker.
Julie's much better with the electronics than I am. I'll be watching cartoons by the time I finish.
Is that screen available? So,
No, it's not.
oh, it's down
Maybe looking through the.
So Chair Williams and Commissioners, my name is Julie McGeever. I am a project manager working with Ed St. George, and I've worked on this project from its earlier iterations, so we're really excited to show you what we have this time around. We've listened, and I think we've got some needles that we've been able to thread quite well. Okay, so this gives you an overview of the location of the project. It is bound by Mission Drive, Pine Street, Maple Avenue to the north. Ellisall Road is also called out as another point of access in reaching over to Maple Drive. When we first brought the project to you, Ed St. George had not purchased the property on Pine Street. So at that point, the sole means of access to the project was through Maple Avenue and or through an existing curb cut at Mission Drive. We heard very clearly from numerous different sources about the concerns about 246, that being a congested path already. And in researching our different alternatives, Ed was able to secure the property in Pine Street. So you can see the 2 points of access that we're proposing for the site. That calls out a signalized intersection. So this can be a little tough to read, but you can see the main point of access is coming off of Pine Street, and you'll see there's 3 small buildings there. They're all envisioned as bungalow type condominium units, again, hotel units. You would enter into the project and either turn left into a courtyard entry. We've had a chance to actually run this by the fire department last week, and they were quite pleased by the points of access they had throughout the project. And that turnaround will incorporate all the turning radii that you would need for emergency response vehicles. Along the frontage of the property is the more traditional hotel. It is a 2-story element as you're walking on the pedestrian way outside of Mission Drive. It has a rooftop terrace, and then set back from that is a smaller 3rd-story element that's got private units that face out onto Mission Drive. Let's see. Okay, so that defines the hotel uses. I should also point out, and you'll see in subsequent slides, we have an underground parking structure that, again, we listened very clearly to the feedback we'd received before and discussions about perhaps looking at an underground parking structure in this area. It's a really big financial commitment, but as we went through our different design iterations, that seemed to make the most sense. So you can see along the frontage is the 2-story. The highest portion of the building, when we've got exhibits you'll see shortly, is along the west end of the project property line, so facing adjacent to the Veterans Building. At the rear of the property, it is again 3 stories, and then the elements facing off of Pine, as I said, are 2-story and 3-story. At the back of the project, we have a multifamily residential project. Again, the intent was, in asking for the rezone, that we still met the intent of the multifamily that had been anticipated at this site and is part of the commitment to the state rent accounts. Ed puzzled over this for quite a while, and I think we've come up with a solution that is a betterment in a lot of different ways. We're proposing 45 units here. They're all what we are stating are micro units. They're about 410 square feet.
Between 380 and 410, there's 2 of the units would be 410.
And we'll show you some visuals of the interior of the spaces, but they're highly efficient. They have quite generous kitchens and bathrooms, which seem to be 2 of the elements that are preferred, as you know, you need to have reasonable accommodations within the apartment. And the neat thing about this, they are located in the downtown core where multifamily rentals are very scarce. And the intent also, if you've got 45 micro units here that are available to the workforce downtown, that's 45 more trips that are not coming from Orcutt, not coming from Santa Maria, not coming from the outside area. It's also a resource for the retail and hotel establishments here in town that have a real struggle, encouraging workers to live here. You'll see in some cross sections that we're gonna have coming up, the other really interesting thing is because of the grade differential here and the fact that on the other side of Maple Street, or Maple Avenue, you have 3-story multifamily units already. We have some images that you're gonna see shortly. It's very consistent with that whole neighborhood area already. So this gives you an idea of what that studio unit would look like. It's kind of hard to really get a good vision of this unless you can see it in 3D, but highly efficient. It's got a full down Pullman bed. It's got a full kitchen, and the bathroom is quite generous. This will give you a better idea of how the space works.
I actually,
This, just to be clear, sorry to interrupt, this is the micro unit?
this is a micro studio. Scott, I actually built this over at the lumberyard, and it's still there, available if anybody wants to see it. Yeah, Joan stopped by.
It's neat, I was there. and
Yeah,
saw it.
I remember Jack, yeah, it feels good. It doesn't feel nearly as small as it may seem in the plan.
Definitely not a family residence, though.
It's not
One or
intended.
two people
Yeah.
at most.
Well, family, you mean like husband, wife, you mean?
Yeah.
Does that exist?
Multi-family.
Yeah. Yeah, it,
I don't know if you want to
sorry. Yes, that's the idea. It's got a large bathroom. For a couple it'd be perfect, for a single person it'd be perfect. I mean, there'd be instances where maybe somebody has a small child or something and they wanna live there, that would be welcomed as well. It's the law, in fact. But it's really designed around more somebody who doesn't really need a whole lot of space. Hopefully there's somebody that's working downtown, they can walk to work, and they're gonna be using the downtown as their yard, as, the parks as their open space. That's pretty much the idea. We're seeing a lot of this around the whole world right now,
So this speaks to the relative stories on site to give you kind of a bird's eye view. The frontage of the project, as well as the entry coming off of Pine, all of those units are 2-story, compliant with zoning or proposed zoning. Here are the 3-story elements, which includes some multifamily. And here is the piece that is a 4-story element. So again, it's been intentionally parked internal to the site and adjacent to the west side property line. And so we have some view quarter studies to give you a true flavor of what the experience is all around the perimeter of the project. This again is another cross-section, which looks rather daunting when you see it by itself, absent of landscaping or peripheral usage. I think our images, okay, so this is useful. Our tallest structure is set 59 feet back from Mission Drive, and again, you're gonna see this in the 3D models that we're gonna show you shortly. Again, that is just a multifamily. Okay, so here's the existing view looking up Maple for the east. Here would be the element or image with the project installed.
Could you go back to that again,
Yes,
Julie, just so
absolutely.
they can compare one more time?
Oh, yes. So you can see that the existing buildings that are to the left side of the photo are 3 stories. So again, when you lay this in, it's very consistent with the rest of the neighborhood.
It's a little hard, and Maple actually has it's not a steep grade, but it has a grade. And so from this angle here, it's really only gonna appear to be a 2-story. Now from the other side, coming up Maple towards Alisol, it will appear to be more of a 3-story.
Okay, so here's Maple looking west, and here you go. So So here's the east elevation. This is the new entry that we're proposing into the project from Pine Street. And you can see it's very modest in character as you enter into the facility.
Can you go back?
Yes?
Thank you.
Those will look more like, it'll have more of the mission style, more of kind of the little, more of the bungalow mission look. But it will look more residential. The idea is to make, they're smaller buildings, but it will look, so it blends in with the neighborhood better.
Okay, here's south elevation again, facing from Mission. We have a couple different views here.
That's where the ambulance station is?
Here's from the other direction, facing the project site. And you can see the highest element on the western edge.
Go back again,
Yes.
all three of those, please.
Support?
Yeah, I just wanted to say
Yeah.
that there's a lot there.
That's it. I think that's it.
That's it?
So one of the things I did want to point out, there were some questions in the staff report. We threw a lot of information at Lori very quickly when she was putting it together. There was a discussion as to where the parking would be provided. We do have a total of 141 parking spaces distributed through the site. By the pure distillation of the code, we would be required to have 140. So we're a little bit overparked. We are still asking for some consideration to have the opportunity to negotiate to lease an additional number of parking spaces. Our preference would be 25. And the reason behind that is there's a number of common amenities on site. And as Ed has stated in many discussions previous, he really wants this to be a community resource that people that live and work here would also want to use. So it will have a restaurant, it will have a fitness center, it will have a spa, and it will also have some really gracious community rooms that I know that's a resource that is always in greater need. So in anticipating that, we want to have an opportunity to potentially have the ability to lease additional parking spaces off-site. Now that being said, in the fact that we are parking per code and we do have multifamily in site, high likelihood that the people that live in the multifamily have the potential of working here or certainly creating less vehicle miles traveled, I think that will probably be adequately parked just purely for this use. Let's see if there's anything else.
One thing I'd like to mention is that, Joni, I know when we just talked last time, you were concerned about the Parker. And that's why we went ahead and I did the research in putting in the underground parking. It is considerably more expensive, of course, but I do think what it actually did is in looking at the different aspects of the Parker versus the underground, I think the underground actually gave us a better project. The architect that's actually working on this project now currently is the architect that did the Bacara. And if we could go back, what I'd like to kind of point out, it's really difficult to see.
Is there a way to go back to the presentation? Okay. Do you want to go to the plan view?
Yeah, the plan view. You could, yeah, that's fine there. I mean, it's that courtyard where there's that big center fountain. I don't know if you can see it. That is,
Here.
yes. Because of being able to do the underground parking, we were able to do that courtyard, and that courtyard is almost the exact same size as the current Bacara. So if you're interested, it will be a very beautiful entryway now. And then as we're looking at that plan, it's difficult to see I should have brought a pointer. The pool is to the right. You'll see some dots. Yes,
Correct.
that'll be the swimming pool. And so you'll be looking through a series, like a foyer almost, and then seeing the pool. The pool will be private. You won't be seeing that so much through the cars. You'll be coming in more to the concierge desk will be out front there. We won't be serving food out of there, I promise. But it will be quite the courtyard. It should really be beautiful. The balconies, everything is looking out into that courtyard. Very Mediterranean, very European. So I do want to point that out. That was one of the advantages of going underground. But I mean, you can imagine, we have underground parking underneath that swimming pool. And so that whole structure, as you see it, is a huge underground space. I know that I don't know, hopefully this will never ever happen, but if there ever was like a giant fire or something, or the city needed a place to Solson, I mean, the parking areas, it'd be the largest underground space in Subbang. Actually, probably the whole valley. I don't know if anybody has anything else that size, but that was one of the advantages of removing the Parker and going with the underground parking.
And as I noted earlier, the other great benefit, unanticipated, but it's been very useful, in meeting with the fire department, they were pleasantly surprised that they had access to all parts of the site, could use the courtyard as a full turnaround. And the only thing that we have to address, there's a small throat, the throat that's coming into the courtyard, we just have to make some minor adjustments so that they can get their ladders up to the top floor. But other than that, they're incredibly pleasant and give us good feedback.
Good. Okay, any questions?
Yeah, I have a couple. It's the little units, now their parking is also going to be underground in that area where the hotel is?
Partially.
Partially. Okay, so where's their other parking going to be?
We'll have a small self-parker for those,
Okay,
for the multifamily, but partially underneath. The idea is that we couldn't go back further because the reason we put the residential up top on Maple was because that's where the residential was, and we really wanted to hold the building down to it's actually, if you're looking on the street, it'll actually have a lower elevation than the neighboring property across the street. But we did have to put a small parker in there to accommodate for the residences. But obviously it's much smaller than what we had proposed before.
That's street level, correct?
Well, how it works, Scott, is like this, the first level of the residential is almost subterranean. That's why you see what you have. It's difficult to see, but that building is a buttress up against Maple. And that's how we actually were able to keep the elevation down on Maple Street. So there was no opportunity to really get underground parking in there.
can you show that?
Exactly what a cross section is. Okay, it's up this way. Okay, so I'll give you
I don't think it'd be on that one. I'd go to the east side.
yeah. I don't have that.
Do we have the east?
Do we?
I'm pretty sure we do.
That was it?
Yeah, so you're looking at.
No,
it
no,
right
no.
there.
I think she wants a cross section.
Yes, and,
Oh, we don't have it?
yeah, Jared can put it into it.
Oh,
Yeah.
really? I thought I saw it in there.
This one?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. As you can see, the way they, I wish I once again have a pointer.
I think the clicker might have a.
Clicker?
Really?
Oh, this?
See? Yeah.
show up.
It won't show up.
Yeah, they don't show up on the street.
Seriously?
They don't show up on the street.
Great.
But anyways, at the back where the multifamily is, you can see it's cut very much into the grade.
So
So that's
you're
the-
talking about this area?
Yes.
Yes, if you look right there, Jack, it's, you see the grade going up,
Yeah.
that's the ceiling of the first floor
Far right.
to the far right.
And the parker would be that space on the bottom?
The-
where it looks like-
Partially,
Okay.
yes.
Any other questions before we get a public comment?
I do. You were mentioning that on the roof, you're gonna have some type of function space, and then just behind it, there's gonna be some private units. What are those private units?
They're hotel units.
Other hotel, they're guest rooms. You were gonna lease 25 parking spaces.
We're making a request for consideration as part of our full application to take advantage of, there's a portion of the TRC code that does, or TRC zoning that allows an applicant to make a request of the city if there is room to lease in a public parking lot.
And so that's where the vet hall comes in.
Excuse me?
That's
Yes.
where the vet hall comes in.
Ideally, yes,
The vet's parking, you mean?
yeah.
Yeah, Scott, the idea was to open the gym up to the community, the gym and the fitness.
The spa and the fitness center is gonna be open to the public.
Yes.
And then when it comes to traffic and car activity, what is your average length of stay gonna be? Do you know yet?
Well, I know what we're pushing for. I mean, we're pushing for, hopefully, it's probably gonna be close to 3 days.
3 days.
Yes.
So that will reduce traffic in and out of the property, right?
Yes.
The longer the stay, the less activity, okay. And then just curious, you were talking about how you would like to fill your micro units with employees and staff, people who work in the downtown area. Have you looked at or have you identified what your rents are gonna be yet?
No, and that's actually a great question, because one of the things that we're trying to get creative, because we have to be creative
Sure.
in this day and age, with the way the housing laws are, the idea would be to ideally lease these to businesses who would then in turn use them for their employees. That would be my first preference. Where, let's say if you own a restaurant, like in the area, and you're say, hey, I'd like to lease 3 of these. And so they lease them in a block, and they would end up using those for their employees. So the first preferential treatment for leasing these would be to somebody, let's say Ace Hardware says, hey, can we rent 2 or 3 of them? That would be great. You lease those blocks, that would be ideal. I mean, that would be my, if we could do that.
With what minimum lease,
Minimum lease meaning,
length of stay?
well, that'd be at least 30 days. I mean, what I would like to do is, I haven't talked to Ace Hardware, but I have talked to a couple of the restaurants. Let's say a restaurant wants to lease 2 of them or 3 of them for their cooks. I would like to have them lease them for at least a year or 2 years or 3 years.
Sure.
That would be the ideal situation. And those would, like I say, those would be our preferred tenants. That way we kind of assure that people are, hey, this is being used, and then we let the business owner deal with who they're gonna put in there for their business.
Thank you. And this is a question for the city. Do we have anything, any rules or regulations in regards to somebody renting one of these units and then putting it on VRBO or Airbnb or anything like that?
So in the residential zones, we don't allow Airbnbs. In the TRC, we do. And so
And this would be a TRC?
this, at the direction we're going with the applicant's request and going through the full process, it'll be TRC. So we need to make sure that as a condition of approval, that they would not become vacation rentals.
And I would certainly be willing to sign something that sort. I don't want these, I don't want to rent something to Leonardo, then all of a sudden he's my competitor.
Well, it would, I guess my point is, right, okay, but that would change you from a 77-room property to almost a
Right, exactly.
730-room property.
I think mixed use is a good idea. I've said that several times in these commissions. I think we should see more of this town, with a general plan update coming up. I think that's something that should be encouraged.
We are in the process of having a traffic study completed, and I think that's also going to be pretty enlightening. They are going to be studying vehicle miles traveled, and they're very clear about the mixed use that we're proposing for the site.
That's an area that I'm concerned with, especially at Pine and Mission, in making turns into there. It's fine if you're coming up into town and making a right turn, but if you're coming through town and making a left turn, I think that's gonna be problematical. And the same thing coming out.
Can you make a left
Fine,
turn?
making a left turn off of Pine on a Mission, but making a right turn, having to go all the way across with the traffic we have on Mission, I think it's gonna cause problems.
And Jack, the way the traffic is set up now, it's only one way in through Pine. It's not two-way there, it's only one way in. The traffic direction would come in Pine and then go out Maple.
What do the residents that live there think of that?
Oh, the more traffic, the better for them. I'm kidding. No, but I haven't spoken with anybody, but the idea is we really want to keep the traffic flow moving. So it wouldn't unless you went out Maple and then did a right turn, but I mean, we could put a sign there that, prohibited right turns. But the only way we'd be able to go out Pine would be to go out Maple, turn right, and then turn right again. The idea is to get you to the signalized light over to Alisol and Mission. That's why we picked up the property on Pine, for that reason.
Is there any problem with the city turning that in basically to one-way street?
We'd have to, process it through the process. Obviously, there's a couple of concurrent processes going on, as we mentioned before. There is the general plan update, which was updating the entire circulation element. This project is proposed to be processed kind of in concurrence at the same time with the general plan update. So it is something that is definitely can be considered.
Sorry, did I miss that? We're not turning to a one-way street. He's recommending for his guests to make a left.
Yeah, that's on private property, yeah. It's not gonna be a one-way street. Because once you're on the hotel property, it's private property at that point. You go into the restaurant or the hotel, correct?
It's just, it's one way. When we come up Pine, you can only go one direction into the hotel. You can't come out the hotel on Pine.
But it's not a street, it's a private property.
Yeah, it's private property, yeah.
It's a one-way drive.
Yeah. The idea is to have those little bungalows kind of almost to look residential, they're almost kind of like a guardhouse in a sense. Like we want it to look like you're entering something other than a residence, but it's also, like I said, it's unidirectional, for sure.
So I'm lost. So the
Let's
hotel
go back to
people,
the elevation again.
and you might want to take a look at the San Ynez traffic circulation that was done in 2020.
No, the plan,
Okay.
this.
Okay, now help me.
Okay, so the only way you'll be able to come in off of Pine to the very right is one way in and, yes, one way out.
So you're going, okay.
So there's no entrance in off of Maple. All entrances will be off of Pine, is that what you're saying?
No, Maple's different. Maple you can come in.
It's two-way off.
It's two-way on Maple. Yeah. it's
That's
only
just
one way.
access to the garage below,
That's
right?
the access to garage below, correct. Our biggest the idea is, one of the reasons we're putting in the wellness center, is because of the San Ynez Valley and what it represents, at least how I see what it represents, it's a great area to come, pull your thoughts together. I mean, it sounds kind of crazy, but that's why I tell people why I'm getting into the hotel industry, is because there's 25 million people that live 2 hours away that hate where they live, and they need to get away. And sometimes they need a place to get away for longer than just a weekend. And currently, all we kind of have here is just like 1 or 2 night stay hotels. This is more of a, let's come up, convalesce, kind of get your head together, go into a wellness center, learn how to do yoga, whatever. I mean, that's the idea. So, in the wellness center, I can almost guarantee this is not a money-making venture. Wellness centers, Scott will probably tell you this, they don't make money. It's an amenity. It's the only way we're gonna get the restaurant or the hotel up to a 4-star, is by adding a wellness center, so.
Okay. Well, thank you. Let's take it to public comment. And we can bring it back for discussion.
Just get it back. Okay.
So, Nancy, we got your letter. I haven't had a chance to read it, but I assume you're gonna summarize what's in it, or?
I hope you'll give me more than 3 minutes, because this is a very complex project. And applicant has just had 30 minutes to present it. And it doesn't look like that. I have a lot of competition in terms of other people standing and waiting behind me.
Go ahead.
So, and what I was gonna say is, because this is such a complex project, I hope you read my letter, because there's a hell of a lot of stuff in there.
Would you go ahead and state your name for the record?
Yeah, for the record, I'm Lansing Duncan, and I live here in Subbang, lived in the valley for more than 30 years, lived in Subbang for more than 14 years. The problem with this project is it's just way too big. And the problem is this, that Mr. St. George now owns a limited size parcel, and even adding what he got on Pine Street. He can't really build the dream hotel he's wanted to build ever since the last city council recruited him to build a destination hotel for the city here. And he can't do that with the 44 units that are, or 45 units that are included on the site. And what he's done is he's turned those units into a man camp, essentially. Obviously, it is not multifamily housing. That's not housing for families. It's not made that way, not with a Murphy bed, and not with an automated parker. Most of us would not find this very convenient. I know Mr. St. George likes to think that he's great at finding housing for people, and certainly in Santa Barbara he has housed a lot of people. When he tried to make housing for the sheriff's deputies didn't want it. And I'm not sure who's going to want these units here, although we do need units, but we need a variety of units that would serve a variety of people. And these don't really, and they're jammed into maybe 20% of the site. When you have to have 3- and 4-story buildings on top of underground parking, you're overbuilding the site in Subbang. You're definitely overbuilding the site. You should be wary of those fisheye mock-ups that make his 3- and 4-story buildings look smaller than single-story buildings that just happen to be closer to you. You're going to have to ask for some real drawings. And I would say that whoever looks at this needs to have scale drawings of the Vets Hall and the Mission to put side by side with this to really compare them. And you're definitely going to need story poles for a project like this when you get down to that. What he's done to Pine Street, or will do to Pine Street, it will be very sad. I can't believe that now he's almost encompassing that one parcel that he's left on Pine, but if you look at the plan, it almost goes all the way around it, okay? That would be really criminal to surround a residential parcel with that sort of development. And of course, you've figured out for yourselves that Pine Street and Mission is one of the most dangerous intersections we have. And the last thing we want to do is put more traffic to Maple and going around to Alisal and Mission. In the safety study that Commissioner Jameson referenced, that came out as one of the worst performing intersections we have in the entire valley. And if you ask people what they're concerned about with the general plan update, is traffic. That's what they're concerned about. So when you look at the idea that you would be increasing visual impacts on Mission, that you would be increasing traffic, and you will be increasing water consumption 3 or 4 times when we've just had the driest January and February in the period of time that's been recorded, and this is the driest period, it's a mega drought that we've had in 1,200 years, so it would be increasing our water consumption. I think you really have to think twice before you say that this site and our community is adequate at this time for this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Lansing. Anybody else like to speak? How about online? Anybody online? Or
I'm here.
Who's here?
I have my hand up. This is Sheila Benedict.
Okay, Sheila, go ahead.
Well, we know this isn't low-income housing that is proposed, so I won't even get into that. And you guys have talked about parking, but I would like to know, as far as the underground parking, I was the archivist at the Mission for 18 years. So I am very aware of how careful we were that we did not upset any type of sacred land. On anything we did, we always had shoe mesh monitors. Now you're gonna go and dig underground parking there? Has anybody talked to the shoe mesh to find out if they're willing to put monitors up? Kids come to the Mission all the time and find all kinds of artifacts. I brought in ground penetrating radar and forensic canines to double check the graveyard, and some remains were found outside the wall, which we knew there were going to be some. And this was all sacred ground, long before there was a Mission Drive. So I'm wondering if the shoe mesh, maybe they don't care, but they may. And with underground parking, that brings up a whole different can of worms as far as I'm concerned. As far as parking, I've been driving in and out of Mission Drive. We all know Caltrans isn't going to let it happen. They wouldn't let a project at the corner of Mission and Alisal let any type of, there was a building that was going in there some years ago, and Caltrans plus the guy wound up losing his funding. But Caltrans said, no way, those cars are not coming in and out of that corner onto Mission Drive. And you know what that's going to do to Alisal if the cars are going to go into Alisal. So there's a lot of stuff going on here, and my 3 minutes are probably up. But one, the shoe mesh, the underground parking, and of course, our traffic circulation, and I feel sorry for the people on Pine and Maple when all of this happens. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Sheila. Anybody else wishing to speak? Seeing none, we'll bring it back for discussion. And Sheila brought up a question I had as well about the Chumash and when we start digging. I know with the county, when I worked for the county, it was a requirement, any type of construction, you had to have somebody from the Chumash overseeing it. And I don't know if that applies to the city or not.
So what we have done is under SB 52, AB 52, we do need to notify the tribe and also the state in regards to any project that involves general plan changes or rezones or major projects that we know may have an impact. The previous project, Ed St. George and his team submitted an archaeological report that has been forwarded to the Chumash. We have been communicating with them to start the tribal consultation work with this project. We don't have a formal project yet, but we have started that process so that.
we're in the loop, that's good.
And now with the underground parking, we may need to go further than the previous project. So we're working with them, with Mr. St. George to get more information for that review with the tribe.
And the traffic study is gonna be,
The-
it may be the key to the whole
Previous-
thing.
Yeah, previously, again, because this has been going on for a while, we did have a traffic study, but those indicated access off of Mission Drive for just residential. So now we have a different proposal, so they're updating their traffic study to reflect the new configuration with the hotel as well as the micro units.
Okay. And
Who is doing this? I just have a question. Who is doing this?
Mr. St. George is providing a traffic study by
Okay,
their consultant that will be reviewed by our team
okay.
and coordinated with Caltrans.
Prior or post application staff?
It'll be part of the application process,
Part of.
yes. Again, this project has to go through quite a few steps. It's a general plan change, rezone, development plan. There'll be environmental review on the project, and so that's part of the discussion that's going on with the applicant. Is there a concurrent processing that can occur with the general plan update? Because all of the questions that are coming up are also reflective in the issues that are coming up with the general plan. So is there some concurrent processing that we can do,
Some
or is this
synergy
an
we can
independent,
get there.
yes, or is this gonna be an independent application that runs concurrent with the process?
Okay, and then the other question I had, and again, Sheila brought it up, is water. We're in, you could argue that we're in a 2-year drought or a 10-year drought. Am I gonna have to cut back on my water usage because this hotel gets built? So they have enough water?
Yes, I'll take that question. The environmental review for both the general plan update and for this project will look at that issue. And also as part of the specific processing of the project, we'll obviously be looking at the requirements for their usage of water and wastewater. When we look at water supply in a longer term planning, that's really more tied to the long range planning, which is really your general plan update, which ties into your land use and your overall expected growth. So this project is a significant project, but it's not everything that's on the table when you look at the 20-year horizon.
Right.
And it is an infill project, which indicates that it is going to be developed, whether it's 100% residential, 100% commercial. There is going to be some development on here, and so we're looking at that in context with all of the other vacant parcels, underutilized parcels, and those projects that have already been approved and how that rolls into the general plan.
So I'm just concerned, I've been concerned with other projects as well. I've brought up water, and when Matt was here, he always said, yeah, well, there'll be plenty of water, but I'm not so sure, so I'm concerned. I'm just expressing a concern.
It's a valid concern, and I think one of the goals that the city council has recently adopted is continue to pursue being more water independent, looking at recycled water and all of that long range water planning. I mean, even if you didn't change the land use and you didn't do the general plan update, just the way that we are zoned today does allow for continuous growth in the city, which requires additional resources of water.
Well, instead of talking about it in between us, can we ask the applicant if there's any kind of green initiatives or any kind of sustainable initiatives that he's gonna have?
But that would be a good question.
Yeah. There are a number of shower heads that they've come out with now. Believe it or not, there's half gallon per minute. They have toilets now that we've started using over the last 2 years. They're ultra low flush. It's a 2-stage flush, whether it's a half flush or a full flush. We'll have all that in place. I mean, we're gonna do what we can, obviously, to conserve as much water as possible. I mean, unfortunately, I'd love to go solar on this project too, but there's just not a whole lot of space to put it on. I mean, we'd like to do those as well, but yeah, the water will be cut to a minimum. As you can see, most of the landscaping will actually be in pots.
I was about to ask that question too. There's a lot, now there's the parking structure and not gonna have a lot of soil on ground, so I was wondering what the landscaping would look like.
Yeah, it'll be potted for the most part, especially given the fact that basically you're on a floor.
Yeah.
I mean, we could have dirt. We have a lot of times on roof decks as well, but it's not ideal. All the drainage will be running, and we'll collect, per state law, we'll be collecting almost all the water when it does rain on site.
Thank you. Oh, I do have one more question, Ed. But it might be more for your project manager, but I remember a few years ago, there was a big thing called LEED, like leadership and environmental design or whatever. Is that plans for this project, or?
That would be for her.
Because they have like different tiers, like gold and.
Right, you're correct. What we've been leaning more toward now is something called Greenpoint certification. It's a little more user-friendly and it's an interactive dialogue with the GC. It's a set of standards that you hope to achieve in the beginning of the design process. It's tracked by a commissioning agent, and as you actually start pricing out pieces of equipment, fixtures, all of those things, as the GC provides them, they go back and certify that they can be tracked down to certain performance standards. It's much more user-friendly. The LEED certification, I think, had great intentions, but it becomes very layered in the bureaucratic aspect of it. And I found in the tail end of the project, there's less functionality to it. So right now, some of you might be familiar with Rona Barrett's second phase, the Harry's house. It's further down, 246. We're actively using the Greenpoint certification on that right now, and it's been very illuminating for everybody. And we've been able to go back and choose different paths of design and fixture choices and HVAC and water usage to great benefit. So that would probably be the path we'll look at.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? I'd like to say that the general approach, the mission style, is something I like. It's much improved over anything that's been proposed before, how it'll finally end up after going through DRC and what have you, but I think it's on the right track. Anything else?
No, we appreciate your comments, and we will continue to work with the applicant and bring the project forward when it's ready.
Great. Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody. So, let's move on to item 4, planning commissioner comments. Do we have any tonight?
I just want to know what the score is in the basketball game.
Staff comments.
I don't have any additional comments tonight.
Okay. In that case, meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
It's 7:50.